At the bar, there is a 0 beer minimum for the national champion. He can drink all he wants.
Days away from National Signing Day, and Alabama is wrapping up the #1 class for the 10th time in the last 13 cycles. But get this, according to a report from Fox, Nick Saban told a group at a coaches convention that he actually turned down 2 recruits' requests for lucrative NIL opportunities in this class. We'll discuss. And it's all about the quarterback. We're bringing in the co-author of 5-Star QB to talk about just that. Pac-12 Network analyst Yogi Roth joining the show. And sticking with QBs, between incoming recruits, returning talent, and transfers, the Conference of Champions will trot out a star-studded group in 2023. But with all that talent, Yogi tells us how the Pac-12 can get back to competing for national championships. And a guy who knows a thing or two about winning it all, Stetson Bennett, was in the news over the weekend. The former Georgia quarterback was arrested for public intoxication Sunday morning in Dallas. Carl, that is why you are mad today. You explained it a little bit, but I've got a question for you, because the significant part about this, of course, is the timing. It happened on the day that players reported to the Senior Bowl, which Bennett turned down an invite so he could train in Dallas. What effect will this have, if any, on his pre-draft process?
I don't think it'll have any effect. Most guys in football know that a guy might have a drink or two. Public intoxication is different than had it been, say, a DUI. He wasn't behind the wheel. He didn't put anybody's life in danger from a turn to operating a vehicle. I think that a lot of football guys will look at this and say, boys will be boys. He's a 2-time national championship winning quarterback, and they'll tend to lean on what he did on the field in terms of his overall evaluation.
We've heard lots of rumors about the pre-draft process and some of the crazy questions that get asked, especially at the NFL Combine. How frequent is it that a team or a coach or these, analysts will actually ask about this type of thing?
Well, they're going to definitely ask about it. They take a deep dive in it. You're talking about putting a lot of money into these guys when they're getting drafted. So you really want to know as much about a guy as you can. I've coached players before who have got drafted into the National Football League, and those security teams for those NFL teams, they do a thorough job of investigating every single pick that they get as anybody in any employment situation. And so they're going to get to the bottom of everything that is going on with every player. Stetson Bennett is no different. He's going to be asked about this. He's going to be asked about everything about his life. The people around him are going to be asked. And so it's just something he has to be prepared to answer.
All right. I'd love to get your feedback on this, so feel free to submit something in the chat. We would love to take your questions, your comments, concerns. It is a subscriber-only chat, though, which means you do have to subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube page to be a part of it. We want to bring on our special guest host here today, Cooper Petagna, national recruiting analyst. As I said at the beginning of the show, Cooper, we are officially 2 days away until National Signing Day, so a lot of headlines that we want to hit there. But I got to ask you about one more headline we talked about today, and that is Nick Saban and Alabama. When it comes to this story in particular, I think the misconception is that this is Nick Saban saying that he didn't need NIL to wrap up the #1 recruiting class this year. If you're reading between the lines here, what is he actually saying?
He's saying you're not worth it, bro. Go play somewhere else, And listen, you don't have the #1 ranked recruiting class in today's college football unless you're involved in NIL. And I think that's a bottom line with Alabama. I think this report can definitely be overblown a little bit when you see what's coming out about Nick Saban and saying he's had to have some hard conversations, whether it's been players on his roster or players that he's recruiting via high school. I think this is all part of it. And I think a lot of programs, what you're going to see them do is they're going to evaluate their board from a value standpoint. It's almost going to operate pretty similar to how the NFL operates with their salary cap. And I think we're starting to see that as more programs get aligned with their third-party collectives. This is going to be the norm. And there's nobody in more of I would say, strong position than Nick Saban to be able to say that than him.
You know, these guys are looking at NILs just like we're looking at professional sports contracts. I don't think Coach Saban is against NIL. He's just against paying the players that he doesn't think is worth it, the amount of money that they were asking for. And what players have to understand in this process is you can overshoot your shot. You can oversell your value. And if you want to play at a place like the University of Alabama, you have to really get in the line where they see your value. And so some guys think that they're more valuable than that, and they have an option to play somewhere else.
Yeah, Nick Saban obviously has a lot more to offer than just the NIL piece of it, but that is definitely a piece of it in college football today. Well, as we are getting ready for National Signing Day, we are your Signing Day headquarters. Join us for coverage all day starting at 9 a.m. Eastern. Then we have a special edition of the College Football Recruiting Show at 5 o'clock to recap the day's action. We've got our network of analysts across the country providing unrivaled insight as we tie a bow on the 2023 class. But we are getting you ready to go right here, right now. We have two guys that have so much experience when it comes to signing day. So Cooper, I'm going to start with you here. It's become, this signing day on February 1st has become pretty subdued over the years with the introduction of the early signing period. But from a roster management standpoint, you've been a part of a lot of these programs, a part of Power 5 teams. I mean, what is it like leading up to signing day?
Well, it continues to evolve. The way it is now is really not the way it was 2 years ago or so. And the reason I say that is because you have the new transfer portal window. And I think what that does, along with spring and summer official visits, that accelerates the timeline for recruits. And the hay is in the barn really in December 21st. That's when the first signing period was. For the majority of the programs across the country, they're going to want to have at least 90% of their targets signed on the dotted line. Yes, there might be a player or two that you're willing to wait for, like 5-star athlete Nicholas Harbor or 4-star quarterback Jaden Rashada. Those guys are worth waiting. But now what you're seeing with the majority of the high school players signing in December, really December to January, starting with that transfer portal window on December 5th, that 45-day window, December 5th to January 15th, the attention is really going to start to change to the transfer portal, and the months leading up to that are just as important. The board is going to be set. You're going to know what your priorities are, and then it becomes about attacking best player available, position of need, and trying to build some competitive depth on your roster.
This part of the signing period, the February signing day, like Cooper said, is kind of anticlimactic because most of the big moves were made in December. But when you're looking at it from when I was a high school coach, I would always be making sure that we didn't have any surprises coming down the stretch and that I knew everything that was going to happen before we actually signed on signing day. Colleges always would send those letter of intents in to those kids a day or two before signing day. It used to be FedEx. Now they do a lot of emails. If I had a kid that was supposed to sign with a school and he was committed, but when I got to my mailbox, if I have 4 different letters of intent, I knew I needed to call them because something may be about to change and I hadn't considered it yet or I didn't know what was going on. But I have more than 1 letter of intent for the same kid. And so I have to know if we're going to have a major shock on signing day.
So you're saying that the fax machine is not the star of signing day anymore? That's changed, Carl? Sad to hear.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely changed. This technology has changed. Everybody's operating out of email now.
Oh, that's too bad. All right. Cooper, I've got to ask you this, just because you've been a part of some of these Power 5 staffs. I know you worked in Oregon and Washington, and you've seen that side of things. But back when you were working with them, it is kind of different, the process of having that early signing period. It's not just the early signing period, though. You've got the transfer portal, you have coaching changes, everything that's going on. How has the process of roster building changed with all this, condension of all of the crazy things going on in college football at the exact same time now?
I think you're seeing more of a leniency into the portal. I mean, I don't think, especially with the contenders, typically what I thought about this a year or two ago when the transfer portal was kind of revealed, and now that we've seen a higher volume of players, I thought for contenders, we'd see 7 or 8 guys maybe that they'd leave room for now. But now you're seeing teams like LSU, who have the number 1 transfer portal program in the country right now in the rankings, And this is a team that already has double-digit commitments on that end in terms of the transfer portal. Ole Miss, the way that they have utilized the portal, they had 13 players signed this year, 12 signed, 1 committed currently in the 2023 class via the high school level, 13 players signed via the transfer portal as well. So in terms of that balance, I think every team is going to be different. I think that kind of depends on where you are in the pecking order. I think national perception is really important. And we've seen teams like TCU who've had a lot of success this year on the field. That surprised a lot of people. But what they've done with that, now going into Sonny Dykes' second year, they've been able to attract a lot of talent that they wouldn't have necessarily been in on from day one. Guys like JoJo Earl from Alabama, Trey Sanders, another name, Jack Besh from LSU, Avery Helm from Florida. The list goes on and on. So now you have these programs who are starting to find their way and navigate the transfer portal the right way. That is the biggest difference, I would say, is now you have another pathway to build a contending team right away and for the long term as well.
When a kid is coming out of high school and he's looking at recruiting, he's looking at a particular block of schools. But the thing about the transfer portal and what has that done for colleges is it's put schools in a position to recruit players that they weren't in a position to recruit or sign out of high school. Because what a player is looking for coming out of the transfer portal is a completely different situation than what he was looking for coming out of high school. A lot of guys that come out of high school are logo chasing, or they only want to play for one of the 6 to 8 top brands in all of college football. But when you come out of the portal, you're looking for immediate playing time. You're looking for NFL fit. They aren't as enamored with some of the bells and whistles that they were coming out of high school. And so that becomes a significant part of transfer portal recruiting. So schools like TCU can get involved on some of the higher level kids in the portal that maybe they couldn't get coming out of high school.
It makes me think of, when you go from your first job to your second job, you have standards, right? You learn what you like, what you don't like, what you really want out of that second job. And so, the transfer portal kind of changes from that perspective of what you thought you wanted as a player coming out of high school changes when you're in it and you go through it. So from that perspective, Carl, as all of these things happen at the same time with transfer portal and roster retention, how have you seen staffs grow or change? Are there new positions that you're seeing now added to staffs?
Well, the recruiting departments have swelled up, the off the field, the personnel guys, recruiting coordinators. Everybody has a GM now, director of player personnel. You have so much support staff to handle the players because not only do you have to recruit guys coming in, you have to also try to keep guys from leaving that you really want to stay. So it's a consistent management of the roster, and the coaches can't do that alone. You have to have a beefed up support staff and recruiting department. And if you don't have that, you're way behind in today's game.
We're starting to see the evolution of college football take place right in front of us. As Carl mentioned, I mean, these recruiting staffs and departments are starting to balloon. And it's not just high school recruiting. Now you have to have a player personnel department really primarily focused on players in the transfer portal as well. And there's other facets to this as well. We're talking about the marketing side, the NIL side of it, the on-campus side of it, what we've seen with Billy Napier and the investment that Florida has made in that regard. I think that is slowly going to inch towards being the standard in college football. And I want to follow up on another point that Carl made. Official visits in today's college football, there's only 5 of them, right? So what I mean by this is they're all important because going through this process now with the transfer portal and with the volume that we see of transfer portal entries, that type of exposure that you're going to have on that official visit very well may be the thing that dictates whether or not you are going to be a factor later in the recruitment when that player enters the transfer portal. So I think the relevance of that is definitely something to consider as well.
Yeah, another kind of short-term problem that we're dealing with right now is the extra year of eligibility due to COVID. And so until that cycles out too, that could, make it more difficult for roster building and just the sheer amount of roster spots that there are because a lot of these players are staying a lot later in college football than they might otherwise. Both of you guys, as I mentioned, have so much experience with this. I mean, Carl's got a great wall of coaches behind him. You've talked to a lot of these coaches. You've consulted with a lot of them. But Carl, you also have the player perspective side of things. And from both of your standpoint, I want to do some signing day storytelling time, because I think not a lot of people realize what goes in to signing day and commitments and just the chaos that happens between the time when a player gets that initial offer from a team to the time that they sign on the dotted line. So Cooper, I'm going to start with you. Is there a story that you have to tell?
Absolutely. I got a good one. I was kind of going through it when I saw this on the rundown, and one from Michigan. I was there in 2017 as a recruiting coordinator under Jim Harbaugh. And you work all year around, right, to put this board together. It's something you have a lot of pride in, and everybody's pulling in the same direction. I remember one day in the middle of December, before early signing, or before the signing period was in February at this point, we have a staff meeting, and all of a sudden there's a new name on the commit list. That name was Ronnie Bell. And at the time, nobody knew anything about Ronnie Bell, the receiver from Park Hill High School in Kansas City, Missouri. He was formerly committed to Missouri State for basketball. Coach Harbaugh found out about him through his brother-in-law. This was a guy that we ended up taking, really didn't even go through the evaluation process with him, but he was a fantastic basketball player, two-sport athlete, averaged over 14 points on the hardwood. We ended up taking him, four-year starter at Michigan, one of the guys that's been really dependable for the Wolverines over the last 4 years and enjoyed a lot of success there. I wouldn't say that's the normal way you should go about your business, but it worked out there and always something I'll remember.
Yeah, we've heard that name now, haven't we, Carl?
Oh, yeah, we've heard that name.
Carl, do you have any stories for us? I know you've already done some storytelling on this show before with Mike Norvell and just some of the interactions with him, but what stands out to you about these days over the years?
You know, we've had some great recruiters come through. I've coached some great players. I had a player that was an Army All-American, Antonio Doyle, who initially went to Texas A&M. And while he was getting recruited by Texas A&M, he was getting recruited by everybody in the country. Their linebacker coach at the time, he came to our school to visit Antonio at 8 o'clock in the morning. He went to every class with him. We had chapel at Lutheran North at 10:15. He went to chapel. He ate lunch with him. He talked to every single teacher. He had a meeting at 1 o'clock with the guidance counselor. As we were getting ready for our game on Friday night, he was in the special teams meeting, the offensive meeting, the defensive meeting. He talked to the officials at halftime. When the game was over and the dads were frying fish, he picked up a spatula and he started frying fish and ate with the dads. He had to be out there till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. He put in a full day of recruiting, and Antonio Doyle ended up going to Texas A&M. I had never seen a guy put in a day like that, the way that Bradley Del Pevedo did that day, one of the legendary recruiters in college football.
Cooper, you're hearing that story. How unique is it to see a guy put in that much time and effort, and not a lot of sleep is had this time of year?
I was fortunate enough to be around Bradley Del Pevedo at LSU back in 2014 when I was an intern. That guy had some charisma. He had a lot of energy about him. There's just some guys that are just blessed with that. And then you add a little bit of sauce in there. You add the competition. They got to be able to go out. They got to get their guy. They got to get their net, and they got to reel him in. You know, Mario Cristobal was like the most maniacal guy that I had ever been around. We've heard the stories 24/7, 365. But, you know, he was a pain in my rear end because that's the way it was. You show up at work at 6 a.m. and you'd be considered late. That's just kind of the way that he rolled. But you wonder why guys like that are so successful. And listen, when it comes to recruiting, you can get a lot done with just hard work, relationship building, and sweat equity, which is what we've seen with a lot of the top recruiters in the country.
Bradley Del Pevedo had a lot of swag. Another funny story, Emily, when I had Ronnie Perkins, Calvin Thibodeau was the D-line coach at Oklahoma. And he called me the very first time we met, and he said, "Do you want me to meet you in your office at the field house?" And I say, "Brother, this is North St. Louis. This ain't Texas. Ain't no field houses in St. Louis."
Oh, I love that little glimpse behind the curtain. I'm sure you guys have a ton of stories to tell, but we actually have a special guest that we want to invite on. But I just talked to him, and he said he doesn't want to come on until we have 50 likes on this show. Do we think that that's reasonable to do? We have 43 right now. So if you want to hear from our special guest, feel free to hit that like button, and we will invite him on. But I want to give you a little introduction of who we're about to have on this show. He is a co-author of this very book right here, 5-Star QB. He's a Pac-12 Network Network host. He's the host of the It Factory podcast. If I list everything this man does, we would be here all day. So let's just go ahead. I see the 50 likes. We are so close. So I'm just going to go ahead and invite him on this show. Please give a warm welcome to our next guest, Yogi Roth. Yogi, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we are very excited to hear more about your book, and I wasn't able to get my hands on it before I found out when you were coming on, so I'm excited to read it after the fact. But I did kind of get a little bit of a glimpse, a little section from it that says this. I want to read this quote. It says, "Some found great success on the field, some didn't. Yet all share one core experience: the football world told them what their life path was destined to be." This, of course, in reference to what happens when we label a guy a 5-star quarterback and just how that changes their lives. Well, we just did that last week when we did our 5-star reveal. So first and foremost, I mean, we're the ones that are just kind of labeling it and walking away and seeing what happens with their career. What kind of pressure is on these guys when they get labeled a 5-star QB?
Well, you probably know that. It's a lot, right? It's the same thing for all of us in our industry. You put yourself out on a TV show or on social media and people can automatically judge you. I think the first thing is, like, I got a ton of empathy for everybody over at 24/7. I've known guys like Brandon Huffman and Greg Biggins and so many of you for so many years. It's a tough job. But what had happened is I've been working for Elite 11 for almost 20 years now. And about 3-4 years ago, myself and the co-author Joey Roberts, it just hit us. Parents and players kept asking the same question. They're trying to navigate the space of recruiting. And like you were just talking about with those stories, there's so many stories I'm sure that you all have told or been asked around, how do I figure this thing out? And what we netted out was there's no way to Google how to be a 5-star recruit or a walk-on recruit or the parent of a 5-star recruit or the parent of a walk-on. We said, well, we got to throw down and put something together. So we created that book. And within it, we wanted to give kind of a book of wisdom, guideposts, and lessons in which different parents and players can look at and say, I want to learn from this. And that's what we did. We interviewed over 130 quarterbacks. So it's not just mine and Joey's advice in the book. And we wanted to hear from them and what they went through. And to answer your question, what we learned is that when the label got placed on them, majority of them didn't ask for it. I remember talking to Ryan Perlew, who's one of the all-time greats, and he said, I was sitting on my farm in Louisiana, and all of a sudden I got a call, and they said, you're the greatest quarterback in the country. And my life changed in an instant. Mm-hmm. And that happened from Ryan Perlew to Sam Heward to Caleb Williams. I mean, guys that have succeeded, some that maybe haven't in the court of public opinion. And I think it's important to take the helmet off of those players. That's why even on the cover, it's their faces, to remind people that, yes, they may go to your school, whether you're at Florida or you're at Alabama or at USC or Washington or Notre Dame, but they're human beings. And I think too often we give them a ranking, we give them a huddle highlight film, we give them an evaluation, and we forget that they're still developing, regardless of NIL, they're still developing in a mental rate of 16, 17, 18 years old. And it's hard to manage all that. And I've been able to learn that over the course of my time at Elite 11 and my time as a broadcaster of the Pac-12 networks and even as a player being around elite performers and quarterbacks when I was playing at Pitt. So I just think it's important to note that. And that was a big reason why we wrote the book.
And I love when we talk to our recruiting analysts and they do give you that little piece of who they are as a human. I think of Nicholas Harbor, and he has dreams and aspirations of not just running in the Olympics, but also of, being a surgeon and being a doctor one day. And so you get to kind of peel the layers back and learn more about some of these athletes. This year in particular, we have 5 5-star quarterbacks. First time that's happened since 2009. So a lot of guys that we're placing all that pressure and all that excitement on. You mentioned your connection with Elite 11. You got to see a lot of these guys up close and personal. I mean, just what are your overall thoughts about this year's quarterback class?
I think it's impressive. And I think overall, when you look at that roster of players and the graphic that's on the screen there, I think like every year we look at them and we say, oh, all right, they're going to be the next thing. I think when you look at the history of rankings, they would say it's probably not going to happen. Now, who can you predict will thrive? Who will you predict will lose a coach? Who might get injured? I mean, there's so many intangible elements to this thing that end up making how we project this thing at this stage of their careers usually unrealistic when you go to the end of it. And the numbers bear that out. I mean, if you look at these guys, I think they all have a chance to thrive, but I'm always reminded, like, there's 134 5-star quarterbacks in history heading into this year, and how many of them won a Super Bowl? 1. And it was Matthew Stafford in year 13 on team 2, and the loose definition of 5 stars, you guys know, is like a franchise player who can change a franchise. So can any of those 5 change a franchise? I don't know. Like, we're going to find out, and I'm not going to say, yes, one's going to walk away with 2 Heismans and 3 Natties and a bunch of appearances in the CFP. I just think it's inappropriate, to be honest with you, to put that type of pressure on any of those players. I hope they all crush it. Huge fan of those guys, was around a few of them, of course, at the Elite 11. They have all the talent in the world, but as we all know, like, this college football thing, talent isn't the only recipe to success. There's so many other ways that allow it to happen and allow us to find surprise players that sometimes we didn't project to be starters or to be big-time players, and they end up becoming that.
Yogi, from your experience at Elite 11, you've obviously seen a lot of guys that have gone on to have success. Not all of those guys 5 stars right in the process, or maybe some guys that surprised you before coming into the Elite 11. When you look at it from a pure intangible standpoint, that week that you have with those players, right? You get to take a look under the hood a little bit. You get to see the camaraderie that they have with other participants there, the level of competition. What are they like on the whiteboard a little bit? With the guys that have succeeded that you see in the NFL or maybe in years past before that, are there some commonalities there that maybe you look for or that you have felt and gained from experience from your time with the Elite 11?
Yeah, man, I love this question and love the work that you do, man. I get to track it and see how you guys evaluate and describe this position specifically. I think the number one thing that I think that we found at Elite 11, like, let's just eliminate elite competitor. Let's eliminate elite passer. Like, you have to be able to do a couple of those things to just get into the room and have success in college, let alone the next level. I think it comes down to 2 things. One, are you able to recapture what we call, like, the wonderment around the game? Like, or has it turned into too much of a business too quickly? I think that is, like, so vital to these players when they find success. You could just watch Mahomes yesterday. Like, he's out there playing like my 7-year-old is playing in the backyard. Do you have the ability, and that's a real tool, can you tap into that? We call it the wonder switch when we meet with guys like Malachi Nelson and other Elite 11 quarterbacks, and we take them through that. And most of the guys have that switch turned off at some point because of recruiting, because they don't live up to expectations, because of a depth chart, because of grades, because of going to college in an unforeseen circumstance, because of a breakup with a girlfriend. Do they have that ability to turn it back on? And I think the great ones do. And I think number 2 is, are you a seeker? We live in a world now with these quarterbacks, and one of my favorite things to do at Elite 11 is to stand beside all the reporters around them and listen to how guys answer questions. And I say that because often they'll try to be very political, say the right thing, do the right thing, and they're put up on this pedestal where they're supposed to have every answer. And the reality is, when you walk into a quarterback room and that Shark Tank, with which that is at Elite 11 or even in college and of course in the NFL, you have to be willing to seek. And that's why number 2 is, are you a seeker? Are you willing to ask questions? Are you naturally curious about the craft, about the game? I mean, you could be Joe Montana, day 1 install for his entire career. He took the same copious notes. I'd say the same thing for Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence. When we met them at that stage, some of the best note takers, some of the best questions around the craft, on the field, off the field. And I think that is a real skill. And I think now it's harder than ever because they're hearing from people like you, or they're put up on every stage. And now NIL is such a factor in this that when they walk into a facility, I hope that the coaches front load those type of mental skills and mental traits. Say, hey, man, you have to remain curious. If not, you're really going to struggle this craft, especially a quarterback, because it is the most challenging position, I think, in all of sports. And as we all know, the most scrutinized and hyped. So you have to have that ability to find your joy again, or your wonderment. And then we think the willingness and the desire and the traits to go seek.
If I'm a parent of one of the top quarterbacks in the country, and I come to you because you've got this wealth of experience and knowledge, and I ask you, what are the characteristics and traits that you saw that separate the guys who made it from the guys who didn't? What does my son need to focus on, and what do you think are the most important things he has to have moving forward?
Yeah, I'd send him to you first, man. I mean, I love the stuff that you do with parents and players. I've even been doing it for a really long time at a high level. The first thing, and I have calls with parents all the time about this, and it's really challenging. I have a dramatic amount of empathy for parents in this situation because they're trying to always do what's right, of course, for their son and look in the future. And what often gets forgotten is the immediate and is the absolute present with their son. And that's the first thing I ask them. I say, okay, what's going on right now? How happy is he? What are his grades like? What's his community like? What are his friends like? What's his relationship with his coaches like? Like, is he living in an alternate universe? Like, I get his recruiting is an alternate universe. He might be the only player that's going to a Power 5 school on scholarship. He might be a 5-star player on your ranking system. But what is he like in the present? Where is his mental state? I think now more than anything for parents and for the athlete, and I talk to coaches in the Pac-12 about this all the time, again, are we front-loading mental skills? So let me break that down for you. When you walk into a facility, is the first thing we're talking about X's and O's playbook? Is the second thing we're talking about your NIL deal? Is the third thing we're talking about academics? Is the fourth thing we're talking about social skills and your community outside of the facility? Maybe. But what I hope happens is the first thing that gets front-loaded by these coaches through the parents to the athlete is mental skills. Meaning when you walk in right down the hallway, we've got a room of 5 to 10 licensed professionals for when life does get hard, because it might have been easy up until now. You might have coasted, been the best dude, probably have been the best guy in your area, in your state, maybe in the country at your position. Well, welcome to a totally different planet, and it's going to be a challenge. So we've got some resources for you. So that would easily be the first thing I would tell any parent is check in on the present moment, check how happy your son is, and then make sure you're beginning to front load the mental skills that we all know he will need when he gets to the next level.
You hear that a lot with quarterbacks, as being cerebral and what's going on between the ears. And it's not just processing plays and reading defenses. It's all the other factors that you talked about there, too. You mentioned guys being put on a pedestal. I mean, none is higher than the one if you have the last name of Manning. And, of course, Arch Manning is one of those guys. So we added to that a little bit, too, Yogi, and just calling him not just the number one quarterback in this class, but the number one player. All the detractors, I'm sure you've heard the noise. We already have it going in the chat. I mean, before the show even started, as soon as we said that we were going to talk about Arch Manning, it comes up, right? He didn't come to the camps. He has the last name Manning. That's the only reason that we've got him there. I mean, what's your response to some of those critiques when it comes to this guy's play?
Well, that's the world that we're in, right? I mean, you guys are in the middle of recruiting. You're leading recruiting. It's a billion-dollar industry with a B for a reason. There's a lot of attention, a lot of hype. And a lot of chatter. That's just the reality of it. I think for him, clearly he's a talented player, one of the more talented guys in the country. I never got to meet him personally. I wish I did. I wish you got to be around the community of the Elite 11. I think it's the best part of it is the fraternity, to be quite honest with you. I've seen guys, I remember Christian Hackenberg, his year, when he came out to the camp, that was the week that everything went down at Penn State. And he developed a bond with 20 other players that he's still friends with. So that's, I wish I got to be around him, and more importantly, he got to be around Brian Stump and our staff and Trent Dilfer at the time, and of course all the other quarterbacks. But clearly he's talented. What I love about him is where he's going and where he is, which is with Steve Sarkisian at Texas. Sark taught me offensive football for the most part. My first couple of years on the SU staff were with him and Lane Kiffin as the co-offensive coordinators. I spent 4 years there with him. He knows how to manage this position as well as anybody in America. And every quarterback, I really believe, at multiple points in a season, if you're a starter, and definitely throughout your career, you have these moments where you walk into the OC, the head coach, the play caller's room, and you say, man, it's really hard right now. I remember Leinart did it after we beat Notre Dame on the Bush push. I was in the room that moment. Booty had it, Sanchez had it, Barkley had it. Every quarterback I've ever been around as a coach had it, and anyone has ever talked to as an analyst has had it. He'll have it too. So he's in good hands in that. I think when it comes to public perception and the rankings, it's already out of hand. I mean, I love what you guys just did in terms of rating 32 players as 5-star guys, but I don't know if all 32 are going to be first-round picks in the NFL. And now all those guys have to wear it. So hopefully the facility they go into next knows how to manage those expectations, and the player has those tools ready for him to manage those expectations, because none of them ever asked for it. And I think the same thing for Arch Manning. Like, he didn't ask to be the man in terms of every recruiting site since he was a sophomore and the last name and all those things, but that's his reality. And I'm sure he's been offered a lot of tools to manage that instead of just shutting it out, but actually having processes to deal with that and knowing where he's going with Sark. I think he's going to be in great hands, and I'd imagine will flourish when it's his time to flourish. And I think at this position, we often think that everybody can come in and be Trevor Lawrence, and it's hard. It's hard to go do that your first year. So I hope he gets to sit, gets a breather, and then when he plays in that system, can cut it loose and let it rip.
All right, so Arch is going to play his football in the Big 12 for now. But I want to talk about the Pac-12. I mean, that is your area. And take a look at the quarterbacks in the league. I mean, I know we're 6 months away until the season's starting, but I am so excited between transfers like DJU coming in, guys coming back and playing again like Bo Nix and Cam Rising and Michael Penix. And you got Dante Moore entering the league as well. I mean, there's so much excitement when it comes to the quarterback position. Just how deep is this group?
Yeah, Emily, it's a great question. I said it last year in media days, and I'll triple down on it now. I thought last year going into the season, the top 6 quarterbacks in the Pac-12, name whatever 6 you want. And at the time, Michael Penix Jr. didn't win the job. Bo Nix hadn't won the job. So the other 6 top guys, Tanner McKee, Jaden DeLora, whomever, thought those top 6 would be better than any other Power 5 league's top 6. And I got a lot of flack for it. And I'll say it again now, and I think most people would jump on that bandwagon with the names that you just referenced. I mean, it's absolutely loaded, and it's proven at the highest level. Reigning Heisman Trophy winner, Michael Penix Jr., Heisman votes, Bo Nix in the Heisman conversation. Just those 3, kind of a hard stop, and you say, yep, the Pac-12 would leap any other Power 5 league. Then you add in experienced players like Jaden DeLora, absolutely thrives. Cameron Ward, his 2nd year in Power 5 football, I expect him to play at a high level. Look at what's going on at Cal. They get a transfer from TCU and Sam Jackson. Can't wait to go watch him play. Stanford, who knows what will happen? We know Troy Taylor's offenses have always thrived. Colorado, Shedeur Sanders. I mean, you can go up and down the list. You referenced DJU, and he's going to have to battle a quarterback in Ben Gilbranson that went 7-1. So I'm really excited, especially this part of the country. I've been out here now almost 20 years in the Pac-10 or the Pac-12, and it's always been known, as you all know, as the cradle of quarterbacks, and now it's really back. And no one can even argue that. So it's not like usually I have to get on here and, get on my stump speech and go super hard for the Pac. I get to kick back a little bit because a lot of other people are loving up this league. And I think it's just appropriate. We know we've been down at times, but the cyclical nature of college football is what it is. We've seen it come up now, and I think the portal has aided the Pac-12. And I think when you look at the offenses and the offensive minds in this league, it's not slowing down anywhere. I mean, we didn't even mention ASU. Can't wait to see Drew Pine, what happens with him? Jacob Conover, he was an Elite 11 quarterback. So there are storylines for days in this league, which makes me, and I'm sure Adam Stanko and Ryan McGrady, really happy in your offices.
They are very happy.
Hey, Yogi, I'm pretty excited that you're on to talk a little bit of Pac-12 football. Obviously, I spent some time out there at Washington and at Oregon as well, but I want to talk about Oregon State a little bit. We touched on DJU, and I love my guy, Jonathan Smith. I think Oregon State won 10 games for the first time in 16 years. And if you know anything about Oregon State, that's a difficult place to recruit to. And I think he's done an unbelievable job. He's dipped into the transfer portal. I don't know how familiar you are with Aiden Childs, but I love this kid out of Downey High School in California. We got to see him in San Antonio at the All-American Bowl. He got banged up a little bit as a junior, completed 74% of his passes as a senior, 21-4 overall in 2 years. And he's got a little bit of a run element to him as well. I think this is a guy is a beautiful fit. And as long as we look back, as Jonathan Smith has been at Oregon State, even with the success he's had, I don't know if he's had a guy with the clay like Aiden Childs before.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. We see it the same. He's a true dual threat type of player for Jonathan Smith. I'm a huge fan of how he's built it and rebuilt this thing. When you talk about this quarterback specifically, he's young, man. He just turned 17 years old. I talked to Jonathan about him prior to signing day, and he's a winner. He's got a lot of unique tools to him. He's not going to have to play immediately, and I think he's got a chance to be the future of this offense. And what I love about Jonathan Smith is he was kind of at the game before everybody else in terms of the transfer portal. When he took the job 5 years ago, he said, look, we're going to do common things in uncommon ways. That's the quote that's often attributed to him. And he did. You saw him go to the Big 12 and get a bunch of different players to come in at linebacker or quarterback. You've seen him at the running back spot, at receiver. Find players to come on in and impact that roster. And now they don't have to do it as much, right? We're seeing a lot of these new coaches in year one, year two, flip their rosters because the portal is what it wasn't 5 years ago. But I think Jonathan was on this thing early on. And what I love now is the stability there. I mean, to win at a high level, you can't have dramatic turnover of your assistant coaches. They have not had that. People have come after his coordinators year after year. His offensive line coach, Jim Mahalchik, year after year. And they want to stay. And they've come after Jonathan year after year, and he wants to stay there. And now with the refurbished Reser Stadium, I don't know if you've seen that, but it's going to be off the hook. It's going to be as fun of a place in the country to compete and play ball at. I think it's going to be a real home field advantage for Jonathan Smith. And I think they have a real opportunity to look at their schedule this year to find their way to Las Vegas. Like, I don't think that's crazy talk. Amid all the quarterbacks and all the returners, when you look at how it is laid out and who they play at home and when they play them in their non-con and the players returning and possibly a new quarterback in DJ Uiagalelei, it's going to be a fun team to watch, and they will be a tough out for whoever they have to play. So, yeah, I'm all in on Jonathan Smith.
Yogi, there's been a lot of excitement with Deion Sanders leaving Jackson State and coming to the University of Colorado. He's got some great recruits in the boat already. How good can Colorado be? And when is the last time you've seen people out west excited about the University of Colorado?
Yeah, well, hey, man, I've loved following your camera feed as you've been all over this story, man. I think it's really exciting for college football, and it's really exciting, of course, for everybody in Boulder. They had a year where they won the Pac-12 South under Mike McIntyre, went to the Pac-12 title, sent a bunch of players, specifically on defense, to the NFL as well. Remember, of course, Phillip Lindsay, the running back, who ended up playing well for the Broncos. I think he was undrafted and ended up being one of the top players as a rookie in the NFL. So they've had their moments, and it's always been exciting there. When you go to a game there, even when they have one win, and it's sellout city. I mean, student section's off the charts, stadium, location, the mountains. I mean, it's just everything they have. And now they have Coach Prime in this landscape of college football is clearly going to thrive. I mean, look at what he's done, to your point. Top transfer portal recruiting class, according to you guys, in the Pac-12, one of the best in America. You look at what he's done with his son, Travis Hunter, Cormani McClain now. I mean, at corner, this defense is going to be phenomenal. And I think for me, once I get through all the top-line stuff, I net out at his staff. And I look at his offensive coordinator and say, oh, I know what they did at Kent State. This is really impressive. And then you look at his defense coordinator and you say, oh, that's pretty good pedigree there. And you start to really needle in and look at the staff and the development of the players. It's not going to take them very long. The biggest challenge for them is what Emily said earlier in terms of the pack is loaded. And it will not be easy for them. And, of course, starting with TCU and then Nebraska at home and the rival at Colorado State. And then they go to Oregon and then have SC at home. Those first 5 weeks are going to be must-see TV. But I'm not putting it past Colorado to flip it. Can they flip it like SC did from 4-8 to on the verge of the CFP? I don't know. I want to see spring ball and see what this roster looks like, because them and Arizona State, they're going to have close to 50 new faces on the team. So it's hard to predict now like what they're going to be when they put it together. But, man, I can't wait. I'm going to flap and watch them in spring practice and then, of course, see what happens in the next portal period. But, yeah, Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, it is huge for the Pac-12. It's insanely huge for Colorado. And it's got the nation talking about the Buffs, which hasn't happened outside of that 1 year when Mike McIntyre was Coach of the Year and had them in the Pac-12 title in a while.
Yeah, you said it. Must-see TV. I'm excited to see what happens with Colorado next year. I'm being told that I need to ask the people to hit the like button if you like what's happening here. Yeah, I mean, Yogi's saying it too. So we do this thing on the show where we give our just kind of final thought, final takeaway. We call it our College Football Today takeaway. So, Yogi, you're our special guest. I'll let you start. What'd you learn?
Well, I learned I have a good time coming on this show. I mean, that's number one. I think I've also learned when we're talking about this position, specifically at quarterback, I continue to learn that it's one that as the hype grows, because it'll only continue to grow, I think it's on the people that have a responsibility, like you three, who have a voice, like myself, who has a voice, to just remind people that it's the most developmental position in all of sport. Meaning that, yes, Arch Manning, Dante Moore, Nico, like wherever, any of these top recruits this year or years past, we'd love them to come in and play right now. But let's be real, as the page turns, fan bases are going to turn to next year's quarterback recruit, and this position needs to develop. So I hope for all those players, we continue to talk about that development. When I look at Oregon, it's a great example. Like a couple years ago, they had a huge quarterback recruit. In came Bo Nix, and everybody thinks that all of a sudden their backup quarterback can't play. Well, it's called development. And I think that is the one thing that I continue to learn. So I talk to coaches and players, and I hope all of us continue to talk about that position. It's the most developmental position in the world, regardless of how many stars you have, what your rating is, how many social media followers you have, what have you.
Coop, how about you?
I'm going to keep it Pac-12 in the West Coast. I'm going to give our boy Dan Lanning a shout out. The job that he's done at Oregon. Right now, they are ranked number 10 in terms of the high school recruiting. They're also ranked in the top 10 in terms of transfer portal as well. And this guy, as a closer, shocked a lot of people last year, the way they closed on the number one offensive lineman in the country and Josh Connerly out of Washington. Nicholas Harbor, the number one athlete in the country, was in Eugene this past weekend. He's putting a very SEC flavor on a Pac-12 roster. And I know we saw this before with Mario Cristobal in the line of scrimmage, but he is doing this from top to bottom. I love what Dan Lanning and company are doing in Eugene.
Carl?
Well, what I learned today is that only one 5-star quarterback has a Super Bowl championship. That was news to me today. I never knew that before until Yogi mentioned that. And so what that means to me is that guys, no matter where they end up out of high school, they need to continue to work very, very hard and continue to develop at that position, because anything could happen between high school and the next level.
Yeah, and it just happened too. I mean, it was the last Super Bowl, so for the longest time, there wasn't somebody that had won a Super Bowl as a Whew, that is crazy. My final takeaway is just that you can't teach passion. I mean, Yogi talked about it. You can have all these intangibles and you can work really hard and develop, but ultimately you can really tell the difference between a guy who has the passion and the true love for the game versus a guy that doesn't, and that's really what separates them. Yogi, I can tell you got a lot of passion for this too. I'm excited about reading that book. Thank you so much for joining us here again, the 5-Star QB. Check out his podcast too, The It Factory. I think we have a special guest, somebody that some people here on this network might know. Josh Pate is joining the show. So thank you so much for all that great insight. Cooper, thank you as always. And I'm excited about signing day. I know that you'll be contributing a lot to it. And you're doing it on this podcast here too. Everybody's got a podcast here. Check out the Football Recruiting Podcast with Cooper Petagna and a very, very serious Andrew Ivins. You guys take the recruiting thing very seriously. You can check out new episodes every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And do not forget about our all-day National Signing Day coverage on Wednesday. It begins at 9 a.m. and then we'll have a fun recap show at 5 o'clock. Thank you for joining us today on College Football Today. We will not have a show on Wednesday, just a heads up. As I just told you, we'll be a little busy doing all the recruiting things. So we'll check you out next week on Monday. Thanks again and have a great week.